All right, so let's go ahead and get started. Native plant selection and design. Designing with native plants can be one of the most rewarding experiences, but it can also be can be really frustrating at times because you don't have all the information in hand. But tonight I want to kind of take you through some of the steps that I go through when I think about design, whether that's here at the Arboretum or whether that's at a home landscape. And we all want gardens that are sustainable, easy to maintain, and beautiful. And certainly aesthetics are an important component, what draws our eye. But more and more people are designing and wanting gardens that use native plants, utilize native plants because of the habitat that they create. And that's certainly a bonus. 4 seasons of interest, spring, summer, fall, and winter, can really be beautiful. And so let's take you through some of those steps of gardening with native plants. Some of the things that as I think about native plant design, you try to develop a plan that uses the property to its greatest use and enjoyment. And that's also beneficial to you. It's beneficial to the habitat that you're trying to create. It involves understanding the environment, what's going on, the structures that are there, and then selecting plants that best fit that environment. A good design results in adding value to your yard, but it also adds to the quality of life, and again, creates habitat for the pollinators and wildlife that we're trying to attract that benefit from these native plants. Certainly the industry standards are, green lawns, large lush lawns, irrigated, green blobs, common plants, less diversity, but what we're trying to utilize and encourage people to use native plants, and why that they're embracing this new style of landscaping is that it does create 4 seasons of interest, adds diversity to your landscape, is not static, but it's dynamic. There's always something going on within the landscape. But it also then requires you to think differently about these plants. This idea of landscaping with native plants, it requires you to think, what is a weed? What is, am I willing to accept some untidiness from time to time? It's kind of a paradigm shift, a different way of thinking about native plants, but it's also something that is really important to understand with regards to native plants. These are bringing wild plants from the prairie into your landscape, so they have a tendency at times to look a little unkept. And there's ways you can manage that, but there's also, you have to think about and be willing to accept some of that untidiness. Sometimes we choose plants just because of the space that they take up, but this type of landscaping with native plants is very purposeful, where it creates multiple seasons of interest within the landscape, but it also requires you to learn as you go. And I'll be the first to admit my approach to landscaping and use of native plants is different than it was even 5 years ago. So it's required me to learn what these plants look like at various times of the year, what plants grow well together, what plants grow in certain situations, sun, shade, clay soils, and then also requires you to learn where you can actually find these plants. Certainly we offer them here at the Arboretum, but many of you may not have opportunity to come here to buy plants. Where can you find these plants? So it requires a little bit of learning on your part, and kind of embracing what the prairie looks like too. Why use natives? This list is extensive. We've all seen the reasons. Ultimately, the interest in native plants is growing in such a way because of the habitat that we're able to create. Not only are these plants beautiful aesthetically because of the blooms that they have, but more and more people are interested in what can we do, what role can we play, even in a small setting, to reduce and impact the habitat that's being lost every day to development. So it also helps us create a sense of place, embrace where we live. We live on the prairie, so we may want to utilize more prairie plants within our landscape, and the benefits are enormous long-term, the more natives that you incorporate within your landscape. Some of the basic considerations are, we have quite a few people tuning into this presentation. And if I was to ask you what you want your landscape to ultimately look like, each of you would have a different perspective, different vision of that, of your landscape. But ultimately, our medium is the land, our landscape, our yard, our garden. And ultimately, I think we want to create a sense of place, a place that we can enjoy, that also adds value to the home and to our neighborhoods. The other thing to consider is managerial. We want to reduce the amount of time that we spend in the garden, but increase the amount of enjoyment that we have. And certainly a proper design can help in that regard, but it's never going to be maintenance free. The other thing that I think is really important to think about as a homeowner, as you think about your own design, is what can I manage? What can I realistically manage this year, next year, and in the years to come? And so not to discourage you, but to really make you think about, is a 20 by 20 garden something that I can manage this year, maybe expand on it next year? Or is it larger than that? But really think about your lifestyle and what you're able to commit, because there will be a commitment as far as incorporating and getting this garden started. The other consideration, we talked about it within those elements of why use native plants, is certainly to eliminate harmful practices. But again, the number one reason why we see people coming to our plant sale, coming to the Arboretum, embracing the mission that we have here, is that it is to create habitat, make positive contributions to the environment rather than negative contributions to the environment. And those are extremely important because that gives you the why, gives you the reason why you want to create this habitat and use native plants within the landscape. So let's get started. A starting point, we need to analyze the site, think about how you want to utilize this space, and what plants you want to incorporate or put into your design. So, site considerations. This is a really key point, and if you don't hear anything that I say other than this, match the plants up with the site, but you have to become familiar with the site in order to make that happen. So look at your area. Is it sunny? Is it shady? What is the path of the sun? Is there a path to a garden shed that you want to highlight? Is there something that you want to block, a sight line that you want to block? Is the soil flat or is it sloped, or is it both? Is the soil a dense, heavy clay or a sandy loam? What is there buildings or facilities that you want to landscape in front of, such as a foundation planting in the front of your house? What is the sunlight during the morning, the afternoon, throughout the year? Because again, this will help determine what plants you want to incorporate into your landscape. Is this a blank slate? Is this a new home planting, and you don't have any trees or any plantings at all? So then you have to think strategically about where you're going to place these trees, both for shade and then also for around the rest of the yard. Most of the time people want to place trees on the kind of the southwest portion of their yard to provide shade for the home during the hottest part of the day, as an example. But it's really important to become intimately familiar with your area, with your site that you're going to be landscaping, because ultimately this will help determine what types of plants that you're going to incorporate in area. The other thing to think about is, what are you going to be utilizing this space for? Is it going to be a prairie recreation? The examples here are an island planting with taller plants in the middle and shorter plants radiating from the side. Is there going to be paths where there's going to be more formal plantings with shrubs as foundation or base around the house? But what are you going to be utilizing this space for? Is there going to be fire pits? Is there going to be arbors? Those kinds of things. It's really important for you to think about how you're going to be utilizing this space. Here's some more examples, and there's tons of examples on the internet, but these are just a few that I've pulled up. A path to a garden shed, some lounge chairs to sit and read a book, a fire pit with a paved patio, an arbor that you can use for grilling and entertaining, all of those things. And you can see the many different ways, the different layers of plants and how they've gone about incorporating and utilizing plants in the landscape. But ultimately, you have to determine what you're going to be using this space for. And that will also help determine what plants you want to include. Planting your native garden, control perennial weeds. After I've determined what we're going to be, what spaces we're going to be developing, I like to make a scale drawing, and within that scale drawing, then I look at what plants are existing there. Is there trees, shrubs? Is there problematic weeds such as bindweed, Bermuda grass that I need to get under control before I do any planting at all? Which plants am I going to keep? Maybe there's a half-dying shrub that I need to remove, replace it with something else. But this scale drawing helps me determine sites, paths, those kinds of things, hardscape, and then within that scale drawing, I determine what I want to keep, what I want to get rid of, or what I need to eliminate or get under control before I do any planting at all. And certainly bindweed and Bermuda grass can be very problematic long-term if they're not brought under control. So ultimately, as we've and about and considered the site, what we're going to be utilizing this space for, we're thinking about planting the site, and choosing plants. They should always match the site that you have. And no matter where you live, there's a palette of plants that will fit your site and will grow well in your site. Typically, there's 4 landscaping sites. So either there's sunny, dry, sunny, wet, dry shade, or wet shade. Sometimes there's some variance in between, but ultimately those are the 4 that you get to choose from. And there's a palette of plants that fits and will grow well in that kind of environment. So from that palette of plants that match your site, those plants will grow well with little or no input once they're fully established and have developed their extensive root system. But it's really, really important for you to match the plants up with the site that you have. There's tremendous information out there, whether you get that information from our native plant guide or do simple Google searches for plants that grow in dry shade. But there's, again, a plant palette, a group of plants that will grow in your landscape, no matter what it involves. The other thing, and I like to use this example, choose plants that fit your site. So on the left here, we have swamp milkweed. Beautiful plant blooming right now in the Arboretum. Pollinators like it. Monarchs utilize it as they're migrating back to the south to Mexico. But it likes, as the name says, wet areas. On the right here is Missouri Union primrose. You see this growing in rocky hillsides, exposed, can take full sun, wind, very drought tolerant plant. You can't have these 2 plants growing in the same area together. One's going to be happy, one's going to die because either it's going to be too wet or it's going to be too dry. Again, match the plants up with the site that you have for best results. This will also reduce the amount of maintenance that you have, the amount of water that you have to put on to keep these plants growing. If they're matched to the site that you have, they should be relatively maintenance-free unless there's we go through a prolonged period of drought. So, plant selection, designed for 4-season garden, and we'll talk about all of these more in depth here in just a little bit. Plant in hazy swaths, employ matrix planting, plant in layers, and create some interesting lines is really important. So, plant selection. After you figured out which plants will fit your area, you need to go through and begin to think about this succession of bloom. If you go to the prairie, no matter what time of year, spring, summer, fall, you'll see a different group of plants blooming, growing, and even the plants that were blooming look different. And so there's this succession of bloom throughout the growing season. I've said many times there's no wave petunias in the prairie, so you have to think of these plants that bloom at different times of the year. The ultimate goal is to have something coming into bloom and going out of bloom from spring through fall, and then incorporating some native grasses that look good, provide structure, fill in some space throughout the growing season as well. But how this plays out in a garden design and how I think about it within a garden design is not grouping plants together right next to each other that bloom at the same time. For example, if I had penstemon and evening primrose, both of those bloom in the springtime, I would want to space those out, put those at different places within the garden, and maybe surround those plants with maybe a summer bloomer or a fall bloomer or some kind of native grass, so that when it's done blooming, you don't have a larger void within your, ultimately within your design. Hope that makes sense, but you're thinking of these not only as they grow and bloom, but what will they look like later in the season when they're out of bloom or not blooming quite yet. So the succession of bloom is really important. And again, you can find bloom times for these plants either on our website or Native Plant Guide, or on a simple internet search. It can really help with determining and educating yourself about bloom times, and that will help you figure out how to group and place these plants within your design. So here's an example. This is in the fall. You have October skies asters, the light purple there. Dark purple is purple dome aster. Little blue stem is the kind of fluffy grass there. But on the bottom right-hand side, there is some Missouri evening primrose seed heads. Bloomed in the summer, but it looks really, really nice with the backdrop of the little blue stem there. Other examples are, the stiff uprightness of big blue stem there, the red foliage with the airy seed heads of switchgrass. On the right here is little blue stem again with some pale purple coneflower seed heads. Really pop out and look good with the backdrop of that native grass. On the left here is a rigid goldenrod with a red leaf switchgrass called Cheyenne Sky. On the right is the multicolored little blue stem as it's transitioning to its fall color. Very striking. Incidentally, one of my favorite little blue stems this year, looked really, really good, is a variety called Twilight Zone. Kind of has purplish blue foliage. And it's really attractive, and again, that will transition into colors of yellows and reds and blues later in the season. Another plant that doesn't get utilized enough within the landscape, one of my favorites is Amsonia hebrectii, or blue star. blue flowers in the springtime. It's about 2 to 3 feet by 2 to 3 feet. These are great in mass, so you can have 5 to 7 of them, and they all turn this nice butter yellow in the fall. It's extremely attractive and gives you kind of a pop of color. Imagine that with a backdrop of either a little blue stem or some native switchgrass. That would look really, really attractive. One of the other things that I began to do and utilize more, and again, this is part of the evolution of me learning about native plants and reading how other people utilize native plants within their designs, is this emphasis on creating these hazy swaths. There's such diversity of grasses, textures, from ones that kind of flop over to airy seed heads to the ones that are more stiffly upright. But there's a native grass and selections of native grasses that will add interest, provide filler for other perennials, and what they do, how I utilize these is either in longer swaths or in large groupings that offer backdrop for other perennials, wildflowers that bloom at various times throughout the year. Sometimes you need to have grasses intermingled with your wildflowers. As an example would be coneflowers and little blue stem. Work great together because they prop each other up, and later in the season, like we saw earlier, they highlight the seed heads that turn kind of a blackish color. Really, really attractive. But incorporating more grasses within the design is something, a direction that I've continued to go to, because they're so diverse and they're so drought tolerant and tough, resilient within the landscape. So the other form, and this is something that we're utilizing here more and more at the Arboretum, is incorporating this matrix planting. Creating layers of plants so that it actually crowds out the weeds. So the thought process is provide structural plants. It is of larger plants within the landscape, such as in this example is Joe Pyeweed. It could be a taller aster or some grasses, or a grouping of tiger-eyed sumac. In the middle layer is kind of your seasonal theme layer or your blooming plants, and this could be asters, penstemons, coneflowers, butterfly milkweed, goldenrod, those plants that give you pops of color throughout the year. And then at the ground cover layer is shorter plants that kind of fill in and shade out the soil, crowd out weeds, don't allow the sunlight to get all the way to the soil level. And ultimately what the goal of this matrix planting is to mimic what is happening in the prairie. Dense plantings crowd out weeds, don't allow those weed seeds to germinate, and it's so dense that, but it's also that they're not out competing with each other. These taller structural plants have deeper roots that go down past where most of the seasonal theme layer roots of plants have roots, which is in the top 3 or 4 feet of the soil. And then the ground cover layer is plants that most of the roots are really, really close to the soil surface. But ultimately you're trying to create such a dense planting that no weeds can germinate. This is kind of a shift from how native plants were designed or incorporated within the landscape. Typically you see native plants surrounded by mulch, individual plants. This is more mimicking what you see actually in the prairie. And I think there's real merit in this long term for reducing maintenance, but still creating this habitat garden that's really, really attractive at various times of the year. Something that I think is worth exploring and trying to incorporate within within a native design. The other thing to think about is with regards to layers is most of the time in my designs, I only have maybe 2, 3, maybe up to 4 layers of plants. So for example, the taller layer of plants, maybe trees, shrubs, but then you get into your herbaceous perennials, and that next layer is a grouping of plants that is only maybe 5 feet tall to 3 feet tall. And those are the backdrop plants for some of the middle layer plants that maybe get between 3 foot and 18 inches tall. And then the shorter plants that are closer to the edge of your design. It's really important then you have this tiered look within the design and how you think about what these plants and how you incorporate them within the ultimate design. How this plays out, say in a foundation planting next to the house, you'd have that first taller layer. The middle layer would be, several feet, 3 or 4 feet away from that foundation planting, and then the shorter plants would be next to the edge. So again, you have those 3 tiers of plants, and you can generally fill in just about any planting with those 3 layers of plants, whether it's an island planting, whether it's a foundation planting, whether it's a larger matrix planting. You can usually fill in and create the tiered look that you want. That's really important too as you think about the design with regards to layers is, where will you be looking at this from? Will this be from your kitchen window? Will this be from the street as you pull up to your garage? This also then helps figure out how you want to orient those layers of plants so you can get the most visual impact and enjoyment from the overall design. Interesting lines, this is mostly done with paths, could be edging. Here's 2 examples. One at the top there is a path that leads to the prairie shelter here at the Arboretum, but that line, you want to follow that and see where that path leads you. Both of these are great examples of using Indian grass here on the bottom as a barrier to lead you through the garden. But these interesting lines, they can be clean cut or, with the edging between grass and your native planting, or they can be rock, can be a rock path. But interesting lines and thinking about where you want to lead, where you want to guide, and where you want to go with the path can be really important. The other thing that I do, and I forgot to mention this earlier, is if I'm concerned about and want to think about garden design and what it's going to ultimately look like, sometimes I'll even pull out a garden hose and lay that on the ground, and that helps me define the border of the garden. I can kick it in one way or make it larger, but it helps me step back and begin to visualize what the parameters of this garden are going to be. This is a great way also to lay out paths in your garden, and it is by simply using a garden hose to help you visualize where that path is ultimately going to go. Interesting lines. This is a planting in North Newton, the school, but the stone here surrounding this small island planting help define the space. This is intentional. It helps know where you're going to mow. Keeps a barrier, so it helps you thinking about weeding. Keeps the weed eaters away also from the garden that you just planted. But it could be as simple as rock, could be landscaping stones, could be metal edging, could be landscape timbers, any number of things, but these lines help define where the border of the garden. With regards to scale, typically this is compass plant, one of the taller plants. This would be out of scale in a small, 2 or 3 foot planting next to the walkway up to your front door. It gets 8 to 10 feet tall at times. So when you think about scale, it's to keep plants in scale, include plants that are half the bed widths. For example, if your bed is 6 foot wide, you want to incorporate at maximum plants that are only 3 to 4 feet tall to keep those in scale. Plus, this wood has a tendency to flop over when not supported by native grasses. It's great in larger prairie settings, but in a narrow bed, sticks out like a sore thumb and can be very problematic. So keep plants in scale within your design too. And then think of sight lines. They spend a lot of money on creating these walls. What I like about this is they didn't cover them up with a lot of plant material. Some of them are covered up, but you can still see bits and pieces, hints of those, and it hasn't completely covered up the beautiful stonework within this garden. But think of sight lines, like I mentioned earlier. Where will you be looking at this plant from, this garden from? From your kitchen window, from your back porch. But it's really important to think about where you'll be viewing, because it helps then help you stage the plants from tallest in the back to the shortest in the front. Briefly on plant installation and maintenance, lay out the entire bed before planting. This is a planting we did many years ago here at the Arboretum, but you can see the shorter plants in the front, they're about 1 foot apart, and the taller plants in the middle, they're 2 to 3 feet apart. This is more of an island planting, but this allows you again to visualize what these plants will ultimately look like at maturity. And then as you begin to plant those, don't plant them too deep, especially if you have heavy clay soils. You can mulch them lightly if you're not doing the matrix planting method. Avoid fertilization. Native plants don't need hardly any fertilization, especially the first year. Oftentimes they'll flop. They'll have more top growth than root growth that sustains those plants long term. So I'd avoid fertilization. And then water daily until you get them established, and then check periodically for weeds, problem areas. Most of the times you'll have to do hand pulling, and then in the spring, usually in February and March, you'll have to cut those plants back to 2 to 4 inches off the ground. And again, this is a learning process. Some of those you may not have to cut that far back, but some of them you might. So, and then water periods of prolonged drought, especially those first few years until those root systems get fully established. Just a couple examples of a sustainable garden. This is a labyrinth, a house that's converted their front yard into native plantings, trees and shrubs. Strategic lawn areas with the peripheral of plantings, arbors, artwork, those kinds of things. I like this because it has, again, those the tiered look of the taller canopy of trees, taller grasses working to shorter grasses here around their fire pit. And the use of limestone is really attractive, both as a patio and the stepping stones. Simple garden path with a rain barrel leading to a garden shed. More of a prairie planting. This is in Illinois, planted from seed. If you're planting from seed, you want to begin to do that, and hopefully you have your area ready and you can plant that in November, December. Is a good time to plant prairie from seed. This is a prairie garden here at the Arboretum in the springtime. This illustrates the grasses and how they mature over the year. Little blue stems just starting to emerge and will be, by the end of the growing season, 2 to 3 feet tall. The yellow plant in there is Plains Indian primrose, some penstemon, blue flax, and some common milkweed, which the monarchs love then too. This is narrowleaf coneflower, Engelmann's daisy, and penstemon with, on the left there is common milkweed. A prairie planting again here at the Arboretum, more of a matrix planting, very little space for weeds to infiltrate this garden. This is yellow coneflower and a goldenrod. This is coneflower, different kinds of coneflowers with the yellow goldenrod. I love the way the golden baby goldenrod there matches the yellow cone of that white alba coneflower. Really attractive during the summer months. This is no longer here, but this is used to be our weeping willow. But the Arboretum in the summer months. You think about native plants and this presentation. You have questions, feel free to send those through the link, the chat button at the bottom of the screen. For those of you who are part and will be watching this later, an extended version of this will be sent out with wildflowers that I often use within a native design. So the mission of the Arboretum is cultivate transformative relationships between people and the land. This is the bald cypress here at the Arboretum. But thanks for joining me and being part of this, and look forward to answer your questions here in just a few minutes.